The following podcast may contain adult language and conversations revolving around situations not suitable for immature audiences. Spoilers and general political incorrectness can often be expected, so listener discretion is advised.
They must be destroyed on sight!
Alright, we're back, and we're back with another episode of They Must Be Destroyed on Sight, a movie podcast. I'm your host, Lee Russell, joined by my co-host, Daniel Harper. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great.
And we have two special guests this time around. We have Daniel's lovely wife and podcasting partner from Oi Spaceman, Shana. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome.
Great. Thanks for being here.
We have on this podcast.
What's that?
Oh no. Am I the first woman on your podcast?
Yes.
I am going to bring the word feminist in as often as possible.
Because I never do that.
Yeah, Daniel never does that, yeah.
That or vagina. I don't know. What word doesn't get mentioned enough? Anyways, introduce our other guest.
Probably with these guys it's going to be penis.
And that is our other guest host, Ryan. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to be doing a couple of Mel Brooks films this time around. This was another, I believe this was either your suggestion, Daniel, or was it your suggestion from Shana through you?
I think it was kind of, I'm always like, let's bounce around and do some different stuff. I think I was talking to Shana about what she wanted to, we were kind of talking about her maybe coming on.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Mel Brooks. She's like, I'd love to come on and talk about Mel Brooks.
I have to, okay, so let me give you more of a reason for this. My dad is a California Jew who grew up, he was born in 1950, lived in San Bernardino, so, Mel Brooks movies are, my bread and butter. It is what I grew up on. Mel Brooks might as well be a member of my family, the way I feel about him. So he mentioned something about History of the World Part 1, and I was like, ah! So I think that's how Mel Brooks got chosen.
Right on.
People, you have to have a Jew.
It's the same with me, but I'm just not Jewish. But
Right.
I feel the same way about Mel.
But you live, in California, so...
Hold on,
So
Ryan.
you're Jew by osmosis at this point? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
it's just my family loves Mel Brooks. And
Yeah, well,
I grew up... I learned all the curse words from Mel Brooks films. That's how I learned them.
Well, they're California Jew jokes. They're specific. So you get, at the very least, the California-ness of it, naturally.
I did have a Jewish friend growing up, so maybe that's a factor,
That's
too.
the one, yeah.
That's not quite as Jew-adjacent as, marrying a Jew, but, it's close.
Yeah.
So we are gonna go through two Mel Brooks films. We're gonna be doing History of the World Part 1 and Dracula, Dead and Loving It. So we're gonna go from, some may say good to really awful. We'll see how everyone thinks what they think of it when we get to the actual films. But before that, we actually do have two comments this time around this week. First one I'm going to get to is a shorter one that just basically came in tonight, and this was from The Man Underwater, as the handle he goes by, or she goes by. You never know. They were doing a comment under our Nazi zombie film Shockwaves that we reviewed quite a while back. They say they agree it's a great and underrated horror film. Amazing what they did with just a tiny budget. Interesting to see what they could do with $5 million plus. And I think they must have selected the Nazi actors by how long they could hold their breath underwater. I seem to recall listening to the commentary on the DVD, and they actually stated that the guys they use as the extras for the underwater zombies are, I guess they were all swimmers or athletes of some sort, I believe. So very, very, very possible. But our big comment that we have, I got this earlier last week, I believe it was, and this is from a fan of Oi Spaceman, an acquaintance of yours, Daniel.
We don't have any fans on Oi Spaceman. It's fine.
Well, none that send you any mail anymore, apparently. But
we get occasional messages. Usually, people just come on our show if they actually listen to us. It's that kind of podcast.
Yeah. But this is from Henry.
Hey.
Yeah. He says, "Hi, having listened to most every episode of Daniel's Oi Spaceman, I decided to check out this podcast. I was pleasantly surprised to see atmospheric movies like Beyond the Black Rainbow and older European horror. I listened to roughly 10 of your podcasts. You inspired me to relive Ravenous with my wife and some of the teen sex comedies by myself." He says, "I have been cautious about listening to reviews of movies I haven't seen, but having recently shown my wife Black Sabbath as part of Family Shocktober, I listened anyway. Hearing how much fun you had watching Bay of Blood, I just added it to my Amazon Prime list. I'll also be keeping an eye out for some of your list recommendations. Speaking of recommendations," he says, "I strongly suggest A Virgin Among the Living Dead. It's the best Franco film I've ever seen, hands down. I haven't listened to your review of Vampiro's Lesbos yet, but I remember Virgin being more substantial and much more interesting. Just to be sure to get the original cut, there is a second version with extra material from Gene Roland spliced in. The Roland material is cool in its own right, but literally has nothing to do with the rest of the movie." All right. Well, thank you very much, Henry, for the comment. Do any of you guys have anything to add to that?
Have you guys covered Zombie 2 yet?
No, we haven't actually.
It's another one of those movies where it originally got released as Zombie, and then the Romero movies hit, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna stop calling them whatever we were. Now they're zombies." And they add footage at the beginning and the end of the movie that really doesn't make sense. However, it does have a zombie versus shark underwater scene.
Yep.
And one of the slowest piece of wood slowly entering an eyeball scene effects I've ever seen in the whole movie. I think it is worth it for those two effects. So
That's pretty much the only reason to watch that movie.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, that's a Fulci film. We probably will get to it at some point. We did cover.
Fulci's eyes. That's really the thing. That's what I learned from Giallo. That's one of those things. Fulci loves his eyes. I definitely want to check out. Based on Henry's recommendation, I'm going to check out that film for sure.
Well, we were going to do She Killed in Ecstasy at some point in the new year. So why don't we just make it those two films for that episode?
Sounds like a plan.
Totally up for that. I know Paul will be up for that. Paul's not here, by the way, this week because he is drinking his ass off because it is his birthday weekend. So happy birthday, Paul.
Happy birthday, Paul. He couldn't even be bothered to fast forward through the Mel Brooks films.
No. And, well, you know, the ironic thing is he actually watched, he messaged me and said he actually watched Dracula Dead and Loving It earlier in the week. And now he's not even showing up for the fucking podcast to talk about it. So as he mentioned in our little private chat on Facebook today, Paul, you're a douchebag. Because Henry failed to mention that you're a douchebag, so we'll mention it now. You're a douchebag. Yeah. So there you go.
I don't know if it's a douchebag or why. I think I missed something, but
that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the continuing conversation we have on this podcast, and the guests
Paul's a douchebag?
Well, Paul's just a douchebag in general.
Okay.
Paul doesn't watch the films, Shana. Like he basically has seen them, most of the old horror films, and just fast forwards through them in about 8 minutes right before recording, and then we'll just describe things that he remembers from like 5 years ago, and that's what Paul's place in the podcast is.
Man, why didn't you tell me I could have done that with this movie? That would have been great.
When we get there, I think we'll talk about that a bit, but you know.
Yeah. But, thank you very much, guys, for the comments. Hope to have Henry give us some more comments. It's always nice to have some long, actual, substantial comments. So, Henry and Greg, you son of a bitch, you haven't commented in a couple weeks now, so get back on that. Okay, so now we'll move on. We're not gonna do Movie God this week because since we have so many hosts on and everything, we're gonna have enough conversation to fill the podcast, I think. And Movie God has been sort of going on and on the last couple episodes. It was like taking up half the fucking podcast. So we're just gonna jump into anything we've been watching as of late, anything we might have purchased or watched movie or TV wise. So I'll just open up the floor to whoever wants to go first.
I've been rewatching Twin Peaks for probably the 4th or 5th time.
Nice.
Because I love that show, and every time I watch it, I fall more and more in love with Sherilyn Fenn. So, yeah, Been
Menti's score.
Oh yeah, the music's fantastic, of course. But I mean, I love the whole show and all the characters and everything. But yeah, I've been rewatching that. Other than that, nothing right now. Just
So do you have a major nerd boner for the new Twin Peaks, or are you kind of just cautious about it?
cautious. I try not to get too excited about some of these things that are coming back or being redone or whatever's going on these days. So we'll see. I had the same feeling for Star Wars Episode 7, whether they're making a sequel to Big Lebowski, stuff like that. I just try not to get too excited about it. I guess when they first announced Twin Peaks coming back, there was a bit of initial excitement, but that's, for me, is worn off, and I'll just go through the original series again and rewatch that, because fourth or fifth time through, you still pick up. There's a lot of stuff that you miss. And
you're an obsessive David Lynch fan, says Daniel?
I'm definitely a Lynch fan, but I haven't rewatched a lot of his stuff.
If you're another type of Lynch fan than an obsessive Lynch fan, really? Like, isn't that kind of what David Lynch does, is inspire a certain level of obsessive-compulsive disorder in terms of...
I believe what you're referring to is existential meditation. It is what he currently teaches.
Yeah.
I will second, because I watch a lot of TV. In fact, I would generally refer to it as a shit ton. My current Netflix on repeats are iZombie. I read the original comic. I still like the comic better, but if you're a fan of Veronica Mars, the writing is really similar. So I've had iZombie on repeat just because it is funny, and it's upbeat because it's still on mainstream TV. And then there's Jessica Jones, which Daniel and I watched together, and we're just kind of devastated in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jessica Jones, I'll just kind of, it really is everything. There have been a lot of think pieces that have been put out about this over the last couple of weeks, and I've been really fascinated with the conversation around it. I think that it's deep enough. Shana and I are actually talking about doing a kind of a sideline on an Unholy Spaceman episode and just talking about Jessica Jones. So we'll see if that happens.
Well, I suggested the sideline be on David Tennant, since that is at least somewhat connected to Doctor Who.
It's fine.
Whatever.
We've had people request that we talk about Jessica Jones.
But Jessica Jones, I had someone ask me who my favorite character was, and I think I gave my canned answer, which was, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a watcher of the show, the twin sister, I think, has given amazing performances, and is just, there's a lot going on. But my favorite character is the fucking writing. What I read comic books for, which you don't usually see, like, comic book geeks get what they want out of the transition, and this definitely hits home with, like, taking comic book stories seriously. That's what we do. That and Steven Universe, which is fucking awesome and genderqueer as fuck, and I love it.
With Jessica Jones, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually think I liked it a lot better than Daredevil, just because the writing was on a couple different levels deeper than what's going on in Daredevil, and I really liked the characters. I just thought they worked a lot better. I liked the sort of grounded realism that sort of is in these Netflix series underneath the big spectacle of the actual Marvel films. Man, it just worked really well. David Tennant, just a total different turn from his Doctor Who character. And I was just amazed. Like, I just binge-watched it. I started watching it, watched the first episode, and it was the same thing with Daredevil. It's like you watch the first couple episodes, and then you can't stop watching. And
I haven't watched Daredevil yet, so that should be next.
Yeah, Daredevil's really good, too. And I like that it seems like each one of these Netflix series, they're going for a different feel and a different mood for each one, so they're not all samey. So Daredevil had a certain feel to it, more action movie feel to it to some degree, and Jessica Jones has a little bit of a detective noir feel to it, because that's her profession and everything. But it also had a lot more going on about post-traumatic stress disorder, rape, all kinds of other little things going on in it, and
sounds like fun.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Ryan, though, the weird thing about it is the show is about PTSD, all of these horrible issues, but you love it anyway. even though it's like...
I mean, it's kind of, it's about a cycle of abuse. It's about toxic masculinity and about nice guy syndrome and basically everything that led to Gamergate and all that kind of stuff. And
it's all in there.
And it's a really effective just TV show. It also scratches that Veronica Mars itch for me just a little bit. That it's got a little bit of that kind of element to it as
well.
And
I think that's why I mentioned also watching iZombie, because iZombie is fun. It's like the family-friendly version. If you want to kick it up a notch, Jessica Jones is like the one that's going to tear your heart out a little bit.
And just the acting in the
oh yeah,
it's just so good. Like you just get really deeply involved with all the characters as you follow them along. And I love that they're doing these little, basically mini seasons on Netflix where they just have enough episodes just right. Going for more like the BBC model instead of like the typical American television model where you have like 22 episodes a season or more. I think it helps them keep their stories a bit more concise and well written, and they don't go off on wild tangents. So I'm looking forward to the new seasons. I don't know if they're doing new seasons before they do the Defenders movie or whatever. I don't know what they're doing there, but
I've completely lost track of the Marvel calendar.
Yeah.
But what I also love about it is it sticks closer to, like you're saying, a kind of BBC schedule. But it also kind of goes way back to serial writing, period. Serials and newspapers, serials and on the radio, and ultimately comic books. So, like, comic book storylines, if you actually pay them tribute the way that Jessica Jones does, where you have one big story arc, but you'll move on with the same characters. Comic books, when they're really well written, that's why they're written in a series.
Yep.
So that you can establish some things and move on with a new purpose. So I'm jazzed about it, clearly.
I do have a couple of complaints about Jessica Jones, just as a...
oh, yeah.
The racial politics are a little bit lacking. It's definitely a story where all the black people are pawns of the white heroes. There's definitely an element of that, which hopefully will be corrected by the Luke Cage.
Mm.
And they try and make fun of it at one point, so I'm hoping that they follow through with that.
I mean, it's... well, let's not get into details on that, but I mean, the racial politics, I don't want to dig into that without us actually talking about it. The other thing is, I do think that 13 episodes feels like a little bit much. I think that towards the last third or so, I mean, it feels like there's a little bit of wheel spinning, and we could have moved it. I think 10 episodes would have been about perfect.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I actually even like the idea of 10 even better, honestly.
I mean, it's not terrible. It's just kind of like it does lose a little bit of that momentum towards the end.
I think it loses the momentum, but I think it's more in a beautiful way of circling the drain for me. To get... By the way, I have an MFA in poetry, just in case it doesn't become obvious later. Anyway...
While we're talking about Dracula Dead and Loving It, you might bring out a Sistina or something?
Maybe not with Dracula, but with History of the World Part 1, damn, it gets all my poets in a twizzle. I don't know.
Is that a way of saying you were horny watching it?
We'll get there. I don't know. Is now the time we start talking about that movie?
He's leading the podcast.
Yes, lead. We are leader.
We'll get to him here in just a second. I just want to quickly mention iZombie. Is that one where the woman, she's a zombie detective and she eats body parts to... Yeah,
so So here's my problem with the transfer from comic to TV, just in case someone in your audience wants to comment back to it. So in the comic book, which was illustrated by the Allreds, who are a married couple, they have a very distinctive visual style. I don't even remember who fucking wrote it, because that's the kind of fan I am. I was like, Allreds, pretty. In the comic... She has a friend that's a ghost, there's more female characters, things are a little bit more worked out, but the gist is the same. She becomes a zombie out of her own means, but she discovers that if you eat brains, you stay more human-like, and you basically get little...
You gain personality traits and stuff from the brain you've eaten.
Oh, okay.
Memories. So it's been interesting because it also has dealt with some mental issues and with PTSD because she'd eat some PTSD brain, or she'd eat some agoraphobic brain. So she would experience what it was like to experience that. So that has been interesting. Again, talking about shows that are kind of having the same conversations, but one is PG and one is at the very least PG-13, if not like a soft R.
It's soft R, yeah.
Definitely an R. I mean, there's enough gore in that alone to push it into R category.
Oh yeah, definitely with Daredevil. Daredevil, some of the stuff Kingpin does is just like, wow, you got away with that?
The dude's arm being shoved into a blender towards the end of Jessica Jones. There's blood everywhere.
Spoiler. I can't watch that.
It's ruined for Ryan now.
Yeah, well,
No, you totally can. That's the hard part, man. You totally can. Sorry.
I'll never watch it, don't worry. I'm lazy,
I was
sorry.
just thinking about Fargo when I saw that, so I mean...
Oh, yeah.
Fargo's an R.
Okay.
I hope so. Isn't there just full on like nudity and sex in Fargo?
I don't think there's nudity. There is a little bit of nudity in Fargo, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, why aren't we talking about Fargo? I would love to talk about Fargo.
I haven't watched it yet. So.
Old Jewish men who like to make jokes about farts and poops and shit.
Yeah, we are going to move on.
We're going to make fun of Hitler. Let's go.
Yeah. So we're going to go on to the main event now, and we're going to immediately segue into History of the World Part 1 from 1981.
From the naked dawn of man to the magnificence of the Bible.
The Lord Jehovah has given unto you these 10 commandments.
From the glory that was Rome to the dark evils of the Spanish Inquisition.
For now begins the Inquisition.
To the French Revolution with its squalor and its splendor.
The peasants may grow violent.
They are my people. I am their sovereign. I love them. Paul!
History of the World, Part 1, starring...
It's good to be the king.
More women! More wine! More!
And submit to the king's lustful want.
Oh, that's let off!
Chip, you're beautiful.
Shove it! Let's end this meeting on a high note.
Hey, what country you from? Ethiopia. What part?
125th Street.
Oh.
I'm Miriam. I'm a Vestal Virgin.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
You should have been here over 30 grains ago.
Please ravish me.
Gee, I just ate.
Drama.
Do you require a blindfold?
None.
Have you any last words?
None.
Test the guillotine. Holy
Action.
Where you going? I don't know!
Romance.
Say when?
8:30.
Spectacle.
The Inquisition, what a show. We know you're wishing that we'd go away. But the Inquisition's here and it's here to stay.
Mel Brooks, History of the World, Part 1. 10 million years in the making.
Written and directed by Mel Brooks, and I'm going to give it over to whoever wants to describe the plot and go, because, to be honest, as much as I am a fan of Mel Brooks, I actually thought I had watched History of the World Part 1 at some point, but it must have just been in pieces, because I had not watched the entire film. And Dracula Dead and Loving It, I had watched it once. And I'm more familiar with sort of classic era Mel Brooks, I guess. If that's...
man, see, the '80s to me are classic era Mel Brooks, which is telling because 1981 was the year that my older sister was born. So maybe there's a different reason my dad loved these movies, is he was raising kids and sitting and watching Mel Brooks.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with Blazing Saddles and stuff like that. So, and of course, I am really familiar with Spaceballs because I grew up watching Spaceballs, but in the 1980s, he only did essentially 3 films. So, History of the World was just one I had never watched the entire thing, and so I'm more of a casual, on the side kind of Brooks fan, I guess, to some degree. So, I'm glad I have 2 affirmed, or confirmed Brooks nerds here to actually get into this. So, whoever wants to jump in and describe sort of the structure and plot of History of the World Part 1, feel free.
It's a bunch of vignettes. It's interesting. He's trying to go through the early history. So you start with Mel's take on the beginning of man, which is a bunch of apes jerking off, essentially, as they rise out of the ground to the tune of 2001: Space Odyssey.
What I love about Mel Brooks is he does this nice pastiche of, like, I'm going to make fun of a movie, and then I'm just going to make fun of people. And he tends to pick relevant things. And when they are good relevant things, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, that is still, like, respected at this time, and making fun of it and having monkeys jerk off, that is a joke that stands the test of time, my friends.
That movie is only 13 years old at this point. Like, I mean,
right.
I mean, today, 2001 is kind of, I mean, that's almost 50 years ago now. At the time, it was only like 13 years old, so it was still, I mean, not like a recent movie, but it would have been definitely, people would have remembered seeing it in theaters.
A relevant joke.
Yeah, and then the film continues through the caveman days. Then you have a little bit of biblical stuff. Then you kind of move into the whole, well, I guess the Old Testament stuff, into Roman times, into French Revolution.
You missed the Inquisition.
Oh, missed the Spanish Inquisition, which is the big song and dance.
Yeah.
I did forget about that. But he kind of ends it right as we kind of turn into the 20th century is kind of when it ends.
But he always tells his stories from the point of view of, like, it's always sucked to be Jewish, it's always sucked to be poor, it's always sucked to be black. So he plays everything for some kind of contemporary similarity. So, like, the Spanish Inquisition as like a 1940s style musical,
and
a decent 1940s style musical at that. And I mean, that's what's so funny is now he's having these movies turned into musicals because they were musicals the first time around.
So, big picture, I think the thing with History of the World is it's not one movie, it's really 2 movies with a couple of vignettes. I mean, you know, because the Dawn of Man stuff is kind of just kind of an intro. The bit with the Old Testament is really just kind of lame gag, honestly. And then the Inquisition sequence just kind of connects the 2 big pieces. You've really got, I mean, story-wise, you've really got a parody of a Roman Empire kind of sword and sandal movie, and then you've got a parody of a French Revolution movie with kind of other assorted bits added in. And ultimately, it would be nice if it was a little bit more thematically linked and it kind of felt like more one movie.
Let me blow your minds here, because this is my point as the California Jew watching this. He's also telling the history of Jews in cinema. He's also going through, like, the representation of what it meant to be a Jew watching movies at a certain time. Because if you watch a movie with the Roman emperors and the slaves and the Jews in the audience, all, like, can you imagine being in, like, the most popular movie, the biggest budget movie, and, like, your people are still kind of being persecuted in the 40s? I don't know, there was some shit going on. I think we were getting killed. And Mel Brooks is, like, responding to that time 10 years later and being like, look at how fucking over the top that was.
I'm pretty sure this movie was made more than 10 years after the 40s.
I know. I'm saying, like, 20 years. Him growing up and being able to respond
like 40
to those
years
movies.
later.
But, like, growing up and responding to those movies.
I looked up a little bit about Mel Brooks' background. Mel Brooks kind of grew up in Brooklyn, and born in 1926. he would have been roughly, I mean, contemporaneous with the guys who created Superman and Batman, and kind of in that same kind of thing. He got to start on the stage as an actor and as a writer, and then became kind of an early television guy with Sid Caesar.
Because the whole thing is, why is there the caveman part? Because Sid Caesar.
Yeah, he was writing for Sid Caesar, wasn't he?
Yeah,
well, and that was Sid Caesar.
Yeah.
No, he wrote for Sid Caesar's early shows. I mean, he was basically in television from the time there was American television.
Well, he created and co-wrote Get Smart, which I remember growing up on back in the day. I mean, early. I remember watching Get Smart when I was younger. I didn't know that was Mel until later years.
Mel Brooks was kind of a creator. He was really only involved with the pilot, and then kind of like he really wasn't like intimately involved with the rest of the show.
But I think you have to read into that. Some of this is a commentary of being a Jew in the industry during a time where it was totally okay to make that joke of, oh, he's a Jew in the industry.
Right. Well, he's a Borscht Belt comedian, and that's kind of what you have to understand. He comes from this very stagey vaudevillian, let's dance and put on a show kind of style, very broad. But I think what in Mel Brooks' best films, what he does is he brings more than just a spoof. He brings a certain kind of anger and a political edge to what he does. Yeah. And I think Part 1 is one of the best examples of that, even though I think. I mean, I'm kind of saying, starting with the negatives, and that it doesn't really cohere as a movie. I mean, it just kind of works as really lopsided in the way that it's structured. But I think that once you kind of understand what it is, it really holds up on repeat viewings. Go ahead, Lee. Sorry, I
was just going to say I liked it because it felt like I didn't necessarily need like a strong narrative through the whole thing. It felt like a really good anthology of comedy bits is what it felt like to me. I think the biggest thing I took away from it is that everything engaged me. Like, I was watching it, and there was never a time where I was bored or I wanted to turn away and do something else. Even though not necessarily everything was a big laugh, everything was kind of a, gives me a little smile or a little chuckle. Yeah,
like the first art critic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to make you probably laugh out loud, but it's like, yeah, that's silly. That's Mel Brooks.
There's just a ton of jokes, and it's not even vaudeville. It's like a generation removed from vaudeville at that point.
At this point, it's made in '81, but it's like parodying stuff from like 30 years before that. It's stuff.
Well, what I'm saying is like the performers are all like Sid Caesar, Shecky Greene, people like that. They're all like guys that basically came to prominence in like the 1950s. And they're all guys that Brooks was working with.
Right. Well, who's the narrator? It's Orson Welles.
Orson Welles. And by the way, when I first heard him starting narrating, I immediately thought he was going to go into a commercial about wine. And
where is that?
Yeah.
I first saw this film when I was maybe like 12 or 13. Actually on Encore back in the day.
Jesus. See, and this is the thing. I don't remember the first time I saw this movie. I remember growing up Sundays when my dad had his day off and he would be like half awake, half asleep on the couch, and we'd watch Blazing Saddles or Spaceballs or this. I feel like I guess I am kind of a classic Brooksian.
Yeah.
When I first saw it, I just called the title and went, "Oh, History of the World Part 1. That sounds kind of fascinating." Had no idea I didn't know it was a comedy when I first started watching. I was definitely that kid. I was like, oh, this sounds like a fascinating little documentary I'd like to watch. And then you kind of get into it and go, oh, this is weird. And then as you kind of get deeper into it, approaching this not knowing what you're watching is probably the absolute best way to watch it.
Oh yeah, but I mean.
Lee, I'm just going to throw this in here now while I'm talking. You realize that this shares a cast member with a film we've already covered on this show, on this podcast? It shares a cast member with the Beach Girls.
Oh, Jesus, does it?
Yeah, remember the blonde girl who plays Val? Her name is Jenna Cow.
Okay, yeah.
The Vestal Virgins are all Playboy Playmates, and one of them... Yeah.
I recall seeing Hugh Hefner in there. I invented the centerfold, my new invention. Yeah.
Oh, there's so many great actors in this. I mean, it's like
John Hurt plays Jesus. Like, come on.
Because he just did a bunch of heavy roles, and he wanted to get into a comedy, so he's Jesus in this. Yeah.
Well, and this is Brooks at probably his kind of crux point of being famous enough to be like well liked and probably get a decent budget, and kind of knew who the up and coming people were because he had his hand on the pulse at that moment. So there's lots of things that are funny and got funnier as it aged, as you were like, oh yeah, that person's in it, and that person's in it.
Basically this kind of movie, you can just like hire your buddies and then hire like guest stars who will just come in for 4 hours on a Tuesday and go, all right, that's your, the fact that John Hurt plays Jesus and it's just like, yeah, that's John Hurt. Look,
Yeah. Funny as shit.
Yeah,
and then you got like Harvey Korman just coming in and stealing the fucking show.
Right, I mean, he's in a bunch of films. You got Madeline Kahn, who's amazing in everything.
Can we talk about Madeline Kahn for a second? That's it.
Go ahead.
That's all that needs to be said. I mean, like, she is just
Madeline
so
Kahn
amazing.
is never hotter than when she's hilarious in Mel Brooks films.
Yeah,
and she's like in skin-tight gold lame and still, like, just funny as shit. I don't know.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah, say when 8:30. Yeah.
Yeah, full-on New Yorker accent, in the Roman times, because it's Mel Brooks.
Yeah, and it's her.
Yeah.
It's such a like she's sexually voracious. I mean, she's literally Empress Nympho or something.
Nympho, yeah. And she's surrounded by Vestal virgins who aren't allowed to have sex or do any of that stuff.
Literally playing this character, and it's played for laughs that she's wanting sex all the time, but she's not shamed for it, which I think is.
Oh yeah, she's like totally. All the girls behind her are like, "Oh, look at her! She gets to go pick out the one she's fucking. Isn't that great?" And I have to say,
or the seven, they're
which turns into a whole song. Yes, yes,
yeah.
No, yes.
That's the best songs in history. But so I told Daniel as we were watching this, I may be uncomfortable talking about this movie to some degree because I realize how much of my sexual awakenings were with this movie, because there's a lot of sex and just lots of sex.
I think we'll get into the boobages when we start talking about the French Revolution.
Oh
segment,
my goodness, the cleavage! But starting out with the fact that at 9 I had to be told what a eunuch was apparently to get that.
Yep. Yeah. That probably went over my head the first time I watched this, for sure.
This was what, Gregory Hines' first film role?
Yeah, his very first film role.
And he was replacing Richard Pryor, apparently, who was also slated for Blazing Saddles and had to turn that down as well. So, hey, great for Gregory Hines, but at the same time, I'm kind of wondering, how different would that part had been if it had been Richard Pryor up there doing, the soft shoes on the slave block, I don't know. It might almost have been, dynamically different.
I think Pryor would have played it more as a stand-up, as the angry Richard Pryor stand-up routine, as opposed to Gregory Hines, who plays it more on that vaudeville, the tap, the soft shoe kind of bit. I don't know that Richard Pryor. I think ultimately it would have been written differently for Richard Pryor.
Probably.
And I think, we have to kind of assume that throughout.
I shot an arrow into my chariot. That would have been the.
But throughout Mel Brooks, it's definitely carefully written that there has to be a fair amount of improvised stuff going on.
I was thinking that, yeah.
And especially because watching this movie made me think of Wet Hot American Summer, because I just watched that in the documentary about it. It does have that feeling of a bunch of people who are just really fucking funny and good at what they do, getting to hang out and make fun of the way that they were raised.
I don't see this in quite the... there's less of an improvisational style. That implies a certain...
I'm not saying that there was an improv that then led to an edited script, but there's...
This feels very... this does not feel like an improv script. This feels like Mel Brooks writing one-liners for people. But I think he definitely wrote for actors,
There's so many one-liners in here that I still reference with my family all the time. Especially when Mel Brooks' character Comicus is in line trying to get his unemployment pay. And they ask what his job is, and he says a stand-up philosopher, and the woman's like, "Oh, a bullshit artist." I mean,
be Arthur. Be Arthur.
Yeah, I mean, my family, we reference that all the time.
I am not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I bring you these 15.
I am gonna
10 commandments as he drops one of the tablets on the ground.
I am gonna skip forward a bit, but like this movie has one of my favorite jokes of all time that I reference all the time that no one ever gets, and it is the moment when the guy who's been in jail lets all of his birds free, and they're all fucking dead.
Right.
And, like, for some reason, it is just twisted, and every once in a while, I just want to walk around and go, free, thump, thump, thump. And nobody gets that.
Which is just as absurdist enough to kind of feel more Monty Python than Mel Brooks.
It really is.
Like, it feels like it's a deleted gag from Holy Grail, really. You know?
Yeah. That's the thing. That's why I don't have a complaint about this not having, like, a strong narrative through it, because it does have that absurd Monty Python kind of bent to it, where it works, like it flows really well, I feel. So I don't need it to be like a strong, thorough line through the entire.
I'm not trying to like diminish the film necessarily. I'm just trying to say that like, I mean, it is kind of one of those things where I almost wish there was a full length Sword and Sandal Mel Brooks movie and then a full length French Revolution movie.
Yeah.
I feel like there's
I
enough
think you would have
material.
run out of jokes. No offense to the guy. I love him to death. But I think he knows what his limits are in this movie.
Yeah, I think actually we will get to that probably later when we're talking about Dracula Dead and Loving It, as far as, stretching the joke out maybe too far.
You think?
I think here, keeping the vignettes short, like he's got 2 big vignettes and then a bunch of interspliced little pieces. I think it works a lot better. It keeps, the jokes don't run on too long. Everything works really well, and I really appreciate that. Like, I think that works well because you just hit, joke. Like I said, I'm watching it, I'm smiling, I'm chuckling. Every once in a while, I get a big laugh. I'm never turning away or doing something else, because comparing this to a lot of modern comedies that I can think of in the last 20 years or so, where I don't necessarily get that, where sometimes I'm just watching the movie, I'm not laughing, and it's just like I'm kind of bored for a while waiting for the next joke. Here, everything's going. Like, he's got so many...
awkward comedy. I'm so tired of awkward comedy.
Yeah.
I love how angry this film is, particularly about the treatment of poor people. I mean, that if there's a running theme, it's about like oppressed people like getting fucked over by rich people or torturers.
And that's
sort of
thing,
the
Yeah, it starts at Caesar's Palace, and that's one of the great gags is when they're going to Caesar's Palace, and it's actually the hotel and casino in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when he's talking about like he offends Caesar and all that, but I think the other thing is the vignettes. They help him let it work in the song and dance stuff, because Mel loves the song and dance, and he's able to mix that in.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of reading up on him. Like he was a musician. He studied music back in the day, and
he wrote a Broadway musical in 1962.
Yeah, I mean, he's very musically inclined, and I know he's written a lot of
Grammy
songs in his
an Oscar and an Emmy and a Hugo and a Nebula.
I mean, he's a pretty radical Jew. No kidding. Like he's good for the Jews.
Did anybody check out the rap song he did?
Oh my God.
No, I've never seen that. But,
seriously.
Did he write the one in Robin Hood Men in Tights? Because that was
No.
Okay.
There is a rap song that he did for this movie. Mel Brooks, at age 55, wrote and recorded a rap song called "It's Good to Be the King."
Oh.
And you can watch it on YouTube if you are so inclined.
And it's not really.
I want to do that right now, but I won't.
That line is so full of shit, even when he's saying it. So tongue-in-cheek and, fuck you at the same time. Oh, I love Mel Brooks.
And it's what he sort of uses over and over again in later movies, too. Like, it's good to be the president or whatever in Spaceballs. And yeah.
The people who are in power are always fucking idiots. And the people who have an idea of what's going on are the ones holding the piss bucket.
Yeah. Well, and it's also his moment where pretty much all his films, maybe starting with Blazing Saddles, where he breaks the fourth wall.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the major breakings of the fourth wall in history of the world. Is turns to the camera and says, "It's good to be the king."
It's good to be the king.
Well, the thing with Blazing Saddles, I mean, just talking about like just kind of running out of gags. He basically runs out of gags in terms of doing an Old West movie, and then suddenly just goes, "All right, we're gonna do a musical, and we're gonna break the fourth wall, and we're just gonna, and
it starts before that with Harvey Korman's character when he's doing his little monologue, and he turns to the camera and says, like, "Why am I talking to you?"
There's he also where he's the Duc de Monet or whatever.
Count de Monet.
Yeah. Count de Monet.
Count de Monet.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, my entire childhood I have watched this movie. I was watching this and making jokes along with it and like giggling to myself and thinking of watching it with my dad.
Well, that kind of Count de Monet kind of goes back to a lot of his films. He'll just name a character a name, just set up like one joke. He's willing to do that. Like, screw it, we'll call it Count the Money. Just and it goes back to Blazing Saddles with it's Headley, and he'll just that was more played up in Blazing Saddles, but almost all his films, someone's going to be named that person, maybe just to set up one joke at some point.
There's a character in the Roman section called Mucus, just so he could say, "The streets will run with mucus."
Right. Yeah, he just does that all the time.
I mean, I think partially what I like about this is most of his humor is nerdy Jewish uncle humor. It's kind of a nerdy thing to be like, okay, we're making joke about Roman history as well as jokes about the Roman history movies, and
I mean, there are little jokes about Latin phrases in this movie.
Yeah.
Just the spelling, like, alone on all the signs and stuff.
Yeah, the V. Use of the V is amazing.
The greatest joke in cinema history. Hey, Josephus. Hey, motherfucker.
Oh, no, that's when Oedipus is walking around looking for...
Yeah, Oedipus, yeah.
And there's like... And he literally calls him a motherfucker.
Motherfucker ain't blind as he seems, yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel about this movie, is that I could go line by line, joke by joke, and talk about why it is funny for multiple reasons. I think that says a lot about Mel Brooks as like a craftsman at this point. Of the reason I love the Spanish Inquisition so much is I love those fucking 1940s musicals that had the Esther Williams fucking pool scenes and over the top.
Synchronized swimmers.
Yeah, so adding this extra layer to it and having it be a pastiche plus a parody. And then you have this little side-by-side jokey bit where, the guy's talking about having his balls burned off. And it's like, oh man, what a fucking shame, and he's just
That's
like...
Jackie Mason.
Is that Jackie?
Oh. Jackie Mason.
So good.
I mean, the Torquemada sequence in particular it's completely played straight. Like, it's a completely, like, brilliant Bugsby Berkeley-style musical number. It's so effectively done, and yet just below the surface is, like, this really angry man talking about 500 years ago we were tortured by the Spanish. Like, and, it's...
Disgustingly. And it's so great.
I agree with you, Daniel, there. That's, like, the genius of him, and that goes back to sort of his obsession with Hitler as well. Makes fun of this really evil people or person.
Well, and this is just like you pick your targets well, and you like on one level, this is a really, really dark film. I mean, this is a completely pitch black. It's not hard to imagine a really, really dark version of this. The only thing that makes it watchable really is the fact that the humor is so broad. It works on this kind of like almost like, man, that's so dumb, I can't believe I laughed at it level. And he's really good at mixing the the potty humor, the Count de Monet pissing on his shoes stuff.
Right.
Alongside the like implied rape sequence. These two things work side by side because one is completely juvenile and ridiculous, and the other is completely dark and realistic, but played at this like super like heightened level.
And the thing is, you watch it now and and I think, it could never get made now because people would be so offended.
Yeah.
Funny thing is they are only making fun of the people who are the assholes. Really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the whole in the French Revolution when they're like, "Why do we always sound like this?" You know, and they're making fun of this.
Frenchman says, yeah. And again,
he's writing the pardon for father. How do you say that? How do you write that in French?
I will say that I do see that as the lesser version of the Life of Brian joke about the Romans go home. But
yeah.
I took 3 years of Latin, so there is that as well.
So do we want to kind of wrap up History of the World and then?
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple things I wanted to mention about this one here.
You haven't really talked about the French Revolution sequence, so that would be the only other thing I'd say.
I mean,
there's also the part 2 at the end. I wanna.
Yeah, we will get to that. I just wanted to say first off, there's a lot of matte paintings in this one.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an extensive amount of matte paintings in this one, which I really appreciate. They look really fucking good. I think, honestly, the costumes and everything, like we're saying how close these are to, like, the Sword and Sandals and historical costume dramas and stuff like that. Like, if he had actually wanted to make a straight movie, he could have. Like, yeah. he really could have. Like, it's that good looking, these sort of vignettes are that great.
And I think that's why the jokes carry so well.
Mm-hmm. Because you believe it. Like, you're already sucked into the world, and then he's bombarding you with the jokes, and I think it just works really well. You just go with it, and you're not looking at anything and going, oh, that's fucking shoddy, or oh, that's really cheap. Like, everything looks really good, so I think it works really well in that regard.
All the boobs are very attractive.
And they're real, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, some of the Playmate models maybe aren't real, but because there's quite a few. I noticed when you get to the Vestal Virgin scene, there's quite a few blonde Playmates, which is sort of apparently Hugh Hefner's preference in that one. And some of them look a little enhanced, should we say?
Okay.
But
that could be.
So, I mean, they do make a joke of Cloris Leachman's boobs getting popped by the...
Yeah. But, it's really good. I guess pretty much the key sequence in this really is the French Revolution stuff, and I know Daniel has some stuff he wants to say about this one, so we'll just throw it right over to you, Dan, whatever your thoughts are on that.
Well, I guess I really just wanted to...
I got a question for him. Is it really good to be the king?
It's fucking good to be the king until you die.
Until you die. Until you at the end. I love the Tale of Two Cities kind of element to this, where it's the doubling and the idea of kind of exploring that. Going back to what you were just saying a minute ago, the idea that you really could make like a serious movie out of this. Like this is one of those things. It's not hard to imagine a kind of farcical, mistaken identity kind of comedy. Like it's not hard to imagine that. Brooks kind of has his own other thing going, and he absolutely portrays the abject poverty of the people who are at the bottom of society, and then the effete aristocracy. Just how stupid and silly they are is very much in essence from the beginning. I really love that kind of high and low aspect to it. Again, it kind of goes back to that, like, Brooks is angry about this. I mean, this is 2 years ago, but this is not. Brooks is definitely trying to make a point, not just about the French Revolution, but about wealthy people in general, and about the kind of decadence and the fact that the king is just actively like raping people. And
that all of the women's boobs are like super up high and displayed because that was according to that period. And
right. I mean,
but it's referencing also the movies he grew up on that were hugely sexist and hugely commodified women. I mean and talking about how we still commodify women. I think tongue in cheek.
I think Mel Brooks, and we'll get into this when we talk about the next movie. I think Mel Brooks also just likes the boobs, and I know.
He's a cleavage guy.
There's a little
no question
of an openly sexist part about it, of like What do we do when we make movies? We make the chicks push up their boobs, but hey, it's because we think their boobs are a different part of them.
The dark-haired girl who's the king, puts his face on her boobs and just, very briefly. I looked up the people in this movie. She ends up being a TV presenter, like in Venezuela or something. She was actually a person who is still working as a TV presenter today.
Well, the blonde girl who is the daughter who's looking to get her father pardoned or whatever, Pamela Stevenson.
You see throughout the entire film.
Oh Jesus!
She went on to be some sort of scientist or doctor or something like that. She's
psychiatrist.
Yeah, psychiatrist. Yeah, and also ran for parliament or something as well.
I looked at everybody's Wikipedia page when I was. When I was bored and watching Dracula Dead and loving it, I was.
Yeah, basically, right.
So, the woman who played Miriam in the Roman sequence is also she went on to have she's still a working actress, so you got to do a lot of TV. But I really love the French Revolution sequence. It kind of structurally, it's really just a clothesline for which to hang Mel Brooks's one-liners. I'm not going to complain about that. It does kind of, he kind of rushes the plot at certain points, and just there's not really a narrative through line, but it's really funny and it really follows a mood, and I think that it is the strongest sequence in the film. I think thematically, personally.
Yeah, I agree. Anyone with any other final thoughts on this one before we move on to the next film?
The part two. I mean, I think that's almost the biggest joke is
Jews in space.
Teases part two, but there's never ever been a part two, and there never ever will be a part two.
Jews in Space, which is revisited in Robin Hood Men in Tights as a different song, but still, Jews in Space.
Yeah. And essentially also basically got worked into Spaceballs to a certain degree anyway, if you think about it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And it looks just like those cheesy early '80s Star Wars knockoffs.
Actually, it looks better than those cheesy early '80s Star Wars knockoffs. It looks better than Star Crash.
You look at that and compare it to the Last Starfighter, and it's actually these they don't look terribly different. It's a thing.
Yeah.
I actually will. There was an actual historian. I forget who it was. I think maybe it's Sir Walter Raleigh.
Yes.
Who wrote a History of the World Volume 1 while in prison, and then died while he was writing it, and that's the whole joke of History of the World Part 1, which is just one of those jokes that
it's like nerdy gay uncle, your nerdy gay uncle.
What? Okay.
Not gay. Wow, was that Freudian? I don't even know.
Mel Brooks,
Mel Brooks is
as
not
far as
gay.
I know, he's not gay. But,
he's married to a very lovely woman for many years. He does
have a lot of gay jokes in this. And,
he does.
Yeah, early on, where he's where the first marriage occurred, and then the first gay marriage occurred. That was in the story.
Well, it's funny. All the gay characters in this, other than the gay marriage thing, and actually that was 10 years before there was actually a gay marriage in Denmark. I think was the first one, something like that.
Did we both read the Wikipedia page, Lee?
We did, I think.
Yeah.
I definitely had to scour the Wikipedia page for some stuff, but all the gay characters in this are all like retainers or second in commands or whatever to whatever monarch or leader is going on. So you got a gay character doing the announcements for Nero, Dom DeLuise, by the way, who actually was gay. And you have the foppish one who's with Harvey Korman.
That actor, too, is so funny. Oh.
Yeah.
All I know is Dom DeLuise, he's got such an amazing little scene in Robin Hood Men in Tights.
I think this showcases I think a lot of people maybe give him a bit of flack, he's just Burt Reynolds' gay friend that he put in all his movies or whatever. Fuck no, he was actually really funny and really talented. So
I didn't know Dom DeLuise was gay. I feel really bad for that, not knowing he was gay. But
yeah, I mean he was really good in this. He was he was better than his.
He inspires hedonism bot. I mean it's essentially the same.
Yeah. Yeah, hedonism is, and I think that that's one of the things that I love about Mel Brooks, is not only are the movies still good, a lot of the best parts of his movies have affected a lot of pop culture. And those are the parts that I still love about him. Hedonism bot. The fact that he, pulling the grapes off of everything, and the fact that, everyone is either hilarious or dead, and the brutality of it, but at the same time, he's so sloppy, it's an art.
Well, he very much is this creature of privilege, this creature of power, who has no need of maintaining that power through anything that he does. Like, he can make terrible decisions and it doesn't matter. He can do what he wants. He has no one can tell him no. And it is kind of that, like, power corrupts sort of thing. And even though the movie doesn't confront that directly,
it dances around it a lot.
Well, it's definitely portraying that as that, like, no one will ever tell Caesar no because he's the Caesar. If the power of comedy, you stand-up philosopher who tells truth to power. That's essentially what Comicus's role in that sequence is to say what no one else will say. And I think that's it's deeper than you would think going into this movie.
He is part of that era of comedians that were well read in the history of comedy. Well, they knew vaudeville, they knew stage, they knew, and the Jewish tradition of theater was really separate from even that. There was a tradition of Yiddish theater, there's a tradition of all these kinds of things. And he just touches on all of it, briefly though it may be, but he has that knowledge to pull on. And I think that that's really what rewards the rewatching, is the fact that, like, he knew his shit. He knew what he was making fun of, and he could recreate it well, and
So, moving on to Dracula Dead Loving It.
I think he was a little out of touch with the times.
Yeah. But I guess we're all basically in agreement that History of the World Part 1 is an excellent fucking film. Just immaculately put together and really fucking awesome and well worth anyone's time. And it's not just like a one-time watch too. It's like
definitely quotable.
So unless anyone else has anything to add to it, I guess we will move on to Dracula Dead and Loving It from 1995.
This is the frightening and shocking tale of Count Dracula. Vampires do exist. This one we face is unlike any other. He can change the most innocent of humans.
Oh, Jonathan, let me kiss you.
But Lucy, I'm British.
So are these.
Women are rendered powerless under his spell.
Stand up. Not you. Sit. You stand. No, sit. No, stand. Now, walk to the terrace door. Watch out!
His evil desire has no end.
She's alive?
She's Nosferatu.
She's Italian? Up there!
Make no mistake, he must be stopped. Leslie Nielsen, Peter McNichol, Steven Weber, Amy Yazbek, Lizette Anthony, Harvey Korman, and Mel Brooks.
If she dies, a victim of this unspeakable creature, she will become one herself.
What?
She will become one herself.
Dracula, dead and loving it.
Ah, it's good to be dead.
which ended up being the last film that Mel Brooks has directed so far. Again, I'll just throw it out there. Anyone wants to pick up the plot for this one and describe it?
It's Dracula.
It's as if you were to take Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola film, and add fart noises behind it. That's exactly spelled.
For me, it was interesting because that was the first and the one and only Mel Brooks film that I ever saw in theaters, and I remember the family getting excited to go see it and going to see it.
How depressing!
It didn't quite hit like his past films for us.
I watched this for the first time yesterday.
Yeah, me too. Holy crap! Is it a piece of shit?
I'm going to defend it to some degree,
okay.
but
I will say this: rewatching it was actually funnier than I remember.
It very much exists in that
it's
1995
so 90s.
comedy. It very much is that kind of. This is a low budget comedy. It's got a bunch of actors you don't necessarily know. It's
got
very
those people
broad.
from Wings.
It's got, Amy Asbeck is hot, and
she does the same accent she does in Robin Hood, Prince in Tights, which is her I'm pretending to be European.
Steven Weber, who I like on Wings, but it cannot hold an accent to save his life.
No, and that's it, and that's fine.
I mean,
let me just say this first and get it out of the way. I don't really like Leslie Nielsen or his movies.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, I have not really watched one and it held my attention.
The Naked Gun movies, I think, are good. But that was when it was fresh. That was.
I like Naked Gun. I'll give him that.
The first one is really good.
Okay,
after that, it's like it. After that,
watch it anyway. But there is so much Leslie Nielsen in this, and it feels more like, what did you say, Leslie Nielsen vehicle than a Mel Brooks movie?
I was going to explain
Fine, I'm sorry.
This is why we don't discuss things before we podcast.
Oh my god, I'm married or something. Ew.
I feel like there are two kind of competing goals in this film. There's the kind of broad Leslie Nielsen comedy, and then there's the more clever Mel Brooks comedy kind of buried within it. Because I feel like the Mel Brooks sections of this film, like when he's on screen or when he's in the scene, it's not necessarily that it's as incisive as some of his best work, but it definitely elevates the material, and it really kind of gives this much more. The film kind of comes alive a little bit more, and then you kind of cut back to Leslie Nielsen, and Leslie Nielsen, I think, was a really talented comic performer. He had a really great timing and really great. He's doing his Leslie Nielsen thing, but it becomes really broad and dumb.
Yeah.
Mr. Lord Part 1, as broad as it gets, it's never dumb, and I think that's the thing.
The thing about Nielsen is he was a very underrated dramatic actor, and I think comedy is generally a lot harder to do, and it's definitely hard to transition from doing dramatic acting for the start of your career. To some degree, he's kind of dogging it. He's doing the same kind of shtick that he does for the last 15 years at that point, doing the Zucker brother films, and essentially that he's bringing that sensibility to this film. But he's the straight man. He plays everything straight, and he's reacting to the really wacky shit that happens around him. And unfortunately, I think this movie kind of caters to his Zucker brothers stuff to maybe way too much.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I mean, this film is not just necessarily just Coppola's adaptation of Dracula from 1992. There's definitely a lot of that here. Mel Brooks is actually going back to a lot of other Dracula adaptations. At one point, I believe he was considering doing this in black and white, like Young Frankenstein. Nielsen in this, he is the Bela Lugosi Dracula, essentially. He's basically doing a Bela Lugosi impersonation in this film, and he does a pretty good job.
You wouldn't say Nielsen is bad. I'm not complaining.
No.
I just feel like he's pulling in a different direction. I feel like he goes broad.
Well, and what I want to kind of reference back to the other movie, one of the reasons I like it so much is I think that even the really talented people he has for only a few short minutes Mel Brooks uses them well. The pieces, even if they're the jokes or one-liners, even if they aren't written for that actor, they end up feeling written for that actor. Maybe that's a part of his direction. Maybe that's a part of his writing. I don't know. Whatever is different about Dracula, Dead and Loving It, that kind of mix of knowing what is best for this actor to do in this role, and being able to write it and direct it, something just seems off for me. And part of that might just be that I don't really like
it feels kind of
Naked Gun
unformed.
humor.
It feels like there's not, like, in History of the World Part 1, I mean, and in Brooks' best films, you get a sense of, like, there's a central idea. I mean, Blazing Saddles is ultimately about using the Western to criticize then current issues of racism within, like, a broader context. And then you add a bunch of Looney Tunes style humor to make the medicine go down. Young Frankenstein is a broadly satirical look at a particular genre, but made with an almost meticulous eye towards what those like James Whale films of the 30s looked like. You look at something like this, and it just feels like there are some elements that I really enjoy. They're like the doctor talking about, like, giving enemas to people.
Yeah.
That I legitimately laughed at like 4 times.
Oh my
God. No, I did as well. I wrote that down. I actually took notes on, or not notes, but bullet points, and one of them was just enema.
It'll make it better.
I mean, because that's such, like, connected to, like, Victorian ideas of, like, how medicine works. Like, you just purified people.
Oh, give them an enema.
They were so obsessed with it. The idea, like, Steven Weber's character, like, being terrified of the budding sexuality of Amy Yazbek's character, I think.
Amy Yazbek.
I wish because we know that John Ritter was married to Amy Yazbek. I wish they'd had him in the Steven Weber role. Honestly,
that would have been funny. That would have been good.
It's very clear that, like, really, like, Steven Weber did not give a shit. He's just joking around. One positive I will say about the film is that it is pretty meticulously directed.
I mean, it does basically follow the Dracula story to a T. It changes a couple things around. It also does a good job of aping a lot of the dialogue from the original Dracula film of Bela Lugosi. Like, a lot of the dialogue is directly lifted from that film. And then he just adds, like, a poop joke at the end, like, like the bats shitting on the steps and stuff. Like, he just adds that in, The problem here, and I think we mentioned this earlier, is this is an example of Mel Brooks stretching the joke far too long, and it doesn't work in a feature length, where it would have worked if this had been a 30-minute segment in another film. And this seems to be the kind of theme he was going for in, like, the later half of his career, where he started with Spaceballs, essentially, where it's like spoof, essentially more or less just one film instead of, like, a whole incredibly, varied genre of films, although there were a couple different films spoofed in Spaceballs, but essentially it was Star Wars. And then you get on to, and everyone forgets about Life Stinks, which is, like, a totally atypical film for Brooks.
Yeah, I would love to discuss Life Stinks at some point on this podcast.
Yeah, we'll do that. And
going into Robin Hood.
Yeah, and Robin Hood, like essentially, like, although it does herald back to some of, like, those Robin Hood films from the 40s and 50s and stuff, it essentially is, the fucking Kevin Costner Robin Hood spoofed.
Yeah,
and then you get to hear.
I think Robin Hood's more well done with that single genre than Dracula, Dead and Loving It.
Yeah, and I think the big difference for me too was growing up, I loved those 40s and 50s musicals. And that's what this movie makes fun of, in addition to all the other things it's making fun of. I didn't see the 90s Dracula. I haven't watched a lot of older horror, which I don't know why. I should. I'm a big horror fan.
There's no song and dance in Dracula. I think that's
a big part of it. I mean, too. Like,
there's no song and dance.
Something.
Can I put this in a word?
What?
It's lazy.
Like, yeah, it is.
I will say one of my favorite scenes of all time, though, is when they're putting the stake through the heart and
in the 20 gallons of blood that
just goes everywhere.
Yeah.
And they go back. He's like, "There's so much blood," and they go back. "Why are you covered in blood?" Location.
Can I say I actually remember when I was like 15 or so, and like I'd watched like the news segments about the movies, and I saw like a behind the scenes segment when they were shooting that sequence. And I remember that from 20 years ago, watching that little bit, and just going like, well, that looks dumb. And it's a nice sequence. It's well timed, but it's very it's not that it's bad. It's
cheap. It's cheap. It's really cheap.
It just kind of feels like, so what are you saying with the, like, what's the idea? What's the theme? Like,
there's nothing, like, compared to History of the World Part 1, there's no
nothing at stake.
My thought was I liked it because there's like, well, we got to do the stake through the heart thing, and we want to have a little blood. But they're like, what if we just go so overboard that's so ridiculous?
Okay, then cut out the other half of the movie, and I'd be okay with it.
Well, yeah, there's other problems.
Like
I still really love that scene because it's so ridiculous.
Well, yeah.
And
I would argue that, like, it's nice that it's there. It's nice that I get the point of that. Mm-hmm. It's just, and it's timed well for what it is, but it's just kind of the most obvious version of that joke.
Yeah, it's just an obvious gag.
Like if you imagine another version where, like, every time Van Helsing comes by, like, basically, like, they alternate, like, hitting the stake in, and then, like, Van Helsing goes, oh, I'm gonna tap it, and he taps it, and then it's like, oh no, everything's fine, now all the blood's gone, and then Steven Weber hits it, and then suddenly hit with blood or something.
You see, that's a better joke. That's a better joke.
It just feels like it's a. I mean, even that isn't a very good joke. That's just,
but it's still a better one. Yeah.
It's just sort of like it's funny because, like, you just see him covered in it.
Well, the other good thing is when he's like, she's alive. She's Nosferatu. She's Italian. That's like a perfect Mel Brooks joke right there.
Well, they also the yes we have no Nosferatu, yes we have no bananas joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are great Mel Brooks moments in this movie, but
the yes and no thing. Yeah.
In this movie.
Like there is maybe one little bit of thematical kind of thing going on here, but I mean there's nothing deep like anything going on in History of the World Part 1. Like, I think the only thing he's really making fun of here, like the only thing he's really talking about is sort of Victorian hypocrisy and being afraid of sex and stuff like that, because basically this movie is essentially a vehicle for women to throw their bosoms in dudes' faces and for them to reluctantly reject them.
Wouldn't you love to see that movie, like Mel Brooks actually like actively talking about like the kind of upper class Victorian hypocrisies about like sexual behavior? Mm-hmm. I think that would be amazing. Why did we not see that movie instead of?
Well, if you want to see that movie, watch the Christopher Lee Dracula film, Taste the Blood of Dracula, because that's essentially all that film is about, is the hypocrisy of Victorian values.
There is a before we get to that, because that's deep, very deep. But I love the fact that like pretty much every.
Yeah, I'm done. If we want to go back and talk about History of the World Part 1 again, I'm back in.
Shana's literally texting people on her phone right now.
I am. This is what I did during the movie, so I figure this is what I should probably be doing during the conversation of the movie.
I cannot blame you at all.
We got a third of the way in, and Shana's like, "Do we have to keep watching this?" I'm like, "We probably should, you know." But I do think.
Fair to fast forward.
Yes, I think after the first third it got better. Did I still want to stop watching it? Yeah. I wanted to return to my binge watching of iZombie.
I said, really, we should just fast forward through this, you know? Like,
I just like most of his films, he's always making fun of accents, and I love that.
Yeah.
So early on, he's like, yes, I'm scheduled to meet Count Dracula. And I'm like, Dracula. Schedule?
Ryan is just announcing, all you have to do to make him happy with the movie is make fun of accents, and he's happy.
It's not making fun of accents. It's just
Mel Brooks making fun of accents.
It's just so Mel Brooks. It's just amazing.
My favorite gag, other than the enema jokes, was the bit where neither Dracula or Van Helsing will let the other have the last word.
Yes.
Like Moldavian or whatever, and I really like. Again, there's like a comedy of manners in this. Like there's some really smart stuff. Can I tell you what movie this reminds me of the most?
Mm-hmm.
Like my issues with it. It reminds me of Idiocracy, which is a really dumb movie that really should be smarter than it is. I watched this and I'm like, Mel Brooks, you're better than this. Like and it's the wasted potential. And like Mel Brooks, like you directed the shit out of this. Like this is really well directed, particularly for '95. The early visual gag with the shadow on the wall, I think, is really well done. The sequence with the mirror towards the end, I think there's some really nice like comedy visual sequences. I mean, Mel Brooks is a really talented director, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for being that. There's clearly like energy put into this, and it just kind of like, but ultimately the script doesn't hang together.
Well, I feel again that this is one where if you look at it visually and you look at like essentially where the actors are really pulling the dialogue from the original Lugosi film and stuff like that, where if he had wanted to, he could have directed this as a straight Dracula adaptation again. But yeah, it's just kind of wasted potential, and I think it's kind of telling that this was sort of his last directed film because it was like a big bomb for him. But he was like, after History of the World Part 1, all of his movies as far as box office and critical acclaim were kind of diminishing returns. Spaceballs wasn't even a big success.
Yeah, that was a VHS success right there. I think people realized how good Spaceball was once they got out of the theaters.
Yeah, but this movie is almost like the opposite side of the coin from History of the World Part 1, because History of the World Part 1, its budget was around $10 to $11 million, made a box office of $30 million essentially. This is like the direct opposite. This is a budget of $30 million, and it made about $10 million.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that was what basically killed Brooks as a director.
I mean, the man's almost 90 years old, so, I mean, that's got to be a bit of a factor.
He would have been, like, 70 at the time.
Yeah.
There is kind of that element of just, like, you know what, it's, you know...
He's always a little bit out of touch. He can't make the same witty jokes, and kind of okay about that. I think what's really been great for him is being able to take these movies and making actually even sillier Broadway musicals now, because it makes more sense. But I mean, God damn it, he's old.
And like when you think about it, he's really only had like maybe 2 major bombs in his entire career. I mean, other than that, I mean, everything for him's been pretty much fucking golden. So, I mean, even his decline was pretty much small.
Yeah, I mean, if people think the Robin Hood Men in Tights is part of that decline, I mean, I still really like that film.
It's a funny film.
There's so much good stuff in that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Dracula Dead and Loving It. I definitely remember coming out of the theater disappointed in that film, definitely.
Yeah.
But,
all right, I guess we're getting close to wrapping up here. I mean, if anyone has any sort of final overarching thoughts.
Every woman in Dracula Dead and Loving It has prominently displayed bosoms. Like this.
Oh yeah, well, I mean that's a throwback to Hammer films, like.
Right. I mean, it very much is a like. Certain shots of this look very Hammer, climbing up the steps to the castle towards the end when Van Helsing and Steven Weber's character there's a very clear, obvious kind of map shot that's very Hammer to me, and there's some other, it's very, and that's what I say, like it's well directed. It looks good, especially for a kind of a low budget comedy in the mid '90s. I mean, care went into this on the production level. I just wish that the script kind of lived up. Comedies live and die on their scripts and their performances, and it really is just like the material doesn't deserve the amount of effort that they put.
Yeah, I think actually my favorite part of this, other than looking at Amy Asbeck, is Peter McNichol as Renfield. I think he did a great job as Renfield. And I love that scene with Harvey Korman where they're sitting at the table there, and he just can't stop eating bugs. Like,
you
just ate a bug. No, I didn't. It's in your mouth. It's struggling to survive.
Right,
Fighting for
exactly.
survival. It's like that. I thought that was really funny. But
Well, it's right before they're like, take him away and give him an enema. Give him an enema.
Enema.
Yeah, give him 2 enemas.
yeah, give him 2. Yeah, it's like that's a solution to everything. Give him enemas.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, I honestly don't hate this film. I don't think it's terrible or anything, but it is like
It's not Mel Brooks for me.
no, it's just a comedy film in the '90s, and it's got a few laughs, but for the most part, it's like you're sitting through it like, okay.
It's a Leslie Nielsen vehicle, you know. Oh, and the dance sequences, the dance sequences are amazing, you know.
And I think that is a direct steal. Like a couple of the moments from this are kind of a direct steal from Polanski's The Fearless Vampire Killers. The dance sequence in particular, I think, is kind of a nod back to that. And some of the carriage riding scenes and stuff are as well. That's something Brooks always does. Like he pulls back from like a lot of older stuff and just sort of subtly throws it in there. I think maybe a lot of people probably wouldn't even recognize that because they probably are not familiar. Fearless Vampire Killers.
Definitely, I fall into that category. Yeah.
But I was looking at it, I was like, okay, that dancing sequence, that looks a lot like one of the big sequences from Polanski's films. So, but overall, it's like, okay, the joke's kind of wearing thin, and this is kind of a joke that could have done well in like a 15 to 30 minute vignette in some other film, but stretching it out through a feature length just doesn't quite work, I think. But.
Can I also say that sorry, I had somewhere I was going with that.
I will say I was a bit surprised when you because I got to chat with Daniel and he mentioned doing a podcast on Mel Brooks, and the film suggested. I was surprised to see Dracula come up as one of the films, because I always thought that was his weakest as well. But I mean, it was fun to revisit, and like I said, I actually laughed. I think maybe a little bit more all these years later for some reason. My expectations were very low going into it from my memory, so it surprised me a little bit on some level.
Yeah, we're kind of obtuse with our film picks at some point. Like it's like sometimes we'll let's do this director and let's pick like one of his greatest films and something no one's ever watched.
Right.
Well, it's also like if you pick the good ones, it's sometimes more interesting to look at the bad ones and say why did they fail. I mean, I was also kind of like Lee's like, oh, let's do the Dracula one. I'm like, really? Okay.
Yeah, well, I just felt like if we did History of the World Part 1 and Young Frankenstein, we're just going to sit here and, like, jerk each other off for the entire fucking podcast. Yeah. Like, oh, this movie's great.
I love that, though.
Oh, yeah, but Young Frankenstein is great in so many different ways.
I mean, really what we should have done is Young Frankenstein and Dracula Dead and Loving It. That would have been...
Well, yeah, that could have been a good comparison, too. Or Dracula Dead Young Frankenstein just as its own fucking podcast, because that's such a great movie that you can just do a whole one. I
was arguing for doing the Mel Brooks 1974 and just do Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, because they're both 1974.
I just kind of felt like when I was thinking about it.
You can still do that.
Yeah, we can still do it. I mean, in the future we can definitely do it.
If you want me back, I talk.
Oh yeah, definitely. We can do some more in the future. Definitely, I'm really up for that.
Yeah, from this podcast today, Shana. Like, you're the new co-host. That's the.
I will say this to kind of wrap this all up is, when Mel dies, it's going to be very sad for me, and I literally might have to like take the day off of work.
Oh yeah.
And just watch all his films. I mean, it's going to be a very sad day for me when he passes.
A family member dying.
It's going to be on par with that for me, yeah.
He's getting up there, and a lot of his contemporaries and the people he used are gone now. Like, there's a couple still alive. Like, I think Shecky Green is still alive. Is Sid Caesar still alive? I think he's still alive as well. But a lot of them are gone. Madeline Kahn died way too young.
Way too.
Yeah, I remember when she passed. That was pretty sad.
Yeah, and Harvey Korman's gone.
Oh, even when Mel's wife passed. Anne Bancroft. Felt bad for the man. It's like it should have been the other way around, if anything. There's a really good documentary kind of interview with him. I think it was on Netflix that it's very Mel Brooksian the way he enters this interview and exits, and he goes through a lot of stuff. He goes through early days, talks about his late wife and how important she was to him. And if you guys can find that documentary, I don't know if it's still on Netflix or wherever I found it.
For a long time. And I think for me, I mean, my mom grew up in Hollywood. There's a difference of, I think, knowing just the culture of Hollywood. Mel Brooks helped change a lot of things, I think.
Yeah, for the record, I'm from San Diego and I hate LA, so I'm just throwing that out there.
I'm just saying.
I know what you're saying. Just throwing that out there.
Yes,
Get that on record.
I'm from north side of San Diego. I'm not in San Diego. I'm just outside San Diego.
North side, motherfucker. That's what you're saying. All right. I think we can wrap up here, and this was awesome. Great to have some guest hosts on here. So thank you to both of you for joining us. So basically, Daniel and Shana, where can we find you on the interwebs?
Well, if you're not sick of listening to us talk now, you could listen to now 73 episodes we put up talking about Doctor Who.
Sure.
You can find that at Oi Spaceman. That's OI Spaceman, all one word, .libsyn.com. We just put up a discussion of Planet of the Ood, which went on for over 2 hours because we had our friend Jack Graham on, and that was pretty amazing. And next week, as kind of this episode goes up, it'll be Earthshock, which is Cyberman's story from 1982. So check out that if you're so inclined. And that pretty much what Shane and I have done here on this podcast is very much what you can expect on my Spaceman. So that's worth checking out.
Right on. And Ryan, where can we find you on the interwebs?
I've been doing a whole lot lately. YouTube channel, San Diego Beer Vlog, and SD Beer Vlog on Facebook. Haven't really been doing a whole lot of videos on beer or anything related to that recently, but still very involved with the San Diego beer scene, still homebrewing and doing the whole beer thing. And
are you still writing for, what is it, the West Coaster?
Yeah, I might as well plug that, westcoastersd.com. It's a local periodic or newspaper now in San Diego, covers the entire county, and I do the homebrew column on that.
Right on. Well, we'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, you can download the PDF or whatever of each month's copy, and then we'll do local news on what's going on the website as well.
Right on. Awesome. Okay, again, thank you guys for joining. Ryan and Shana, you're definitely welcome back anytime. We'll figure out some movies to do, and it'll be a lot of fun. We are now on iTunes. If you go to our Podbean site, you just have to click on the spinning hypno wheel, and you'll go right to our iTunes. Since we've gone on iTunes, we've shot up by about 300 or 400 listens, so that's awesome. And anyone who is a constant listener, if you want to, please go to our iTunes site and give a 5-star rating and a review. Written review doesn't really matter. You can say, these guys are a bunch of fucking assholes, and I hate them all, and I wish Hitler would piss on them. Go right ahead. I don't think they read that shit, but as long as you give us a 5-star review, that'd be great, because apparently that is the sort of ticket to getting more and more listens on iTunes, I guess. Apparently it gets you up in the rankings or some shit. I don't know. I put a review on Oi Spaceman, by the way. I gave you guys a 5-star review, so.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
So yeah, and we'll get the trailer at the end. We'll tell you where to go and do all that shit. And yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you guys for joining me, and we'll see you next week. If we get the schedule together, we'll have another special guest, and we'll be doing Sean Connery in a red diaper through most of the film in Zardoz. That'll be a lot of fun. All right, guys. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Listen to me, gonna tell you how I made history. You can call me Louis, I'm the king of France. Check out my story while you do your dance. Now in 1789, the peasants were starving, but I was fine. We were hanging out down in Overside, that's the weekend paradise. streets of Paris, they was eating rats, but it was filet mignon for the aristocrats. There was dukes and counts and barons and earls. I gave them the titles, but I kept the girls. Blondes, redheads, wild brunettes, ladies in waiting, I didn't wait to get. There was truffles for breakfast, tarts for brunch, the Lion of the Follies, Berger for lunch.
Oh yes, it's good to be the king. Ooh la la, gee, but it's good to be the king.
Say it, girls.
You can be sure about one thing. Ooh la la, man, it's good to be the king.
It's good to be the king. Well, the palace was rocking, we were doing it good. When we heard there was some trouble in the neighborhood, I wasn't too worried, no big deal. You step out of line, Jack, you're in the Bastille. The party kept swinging all day and all night. The champagne was flowing, we was feeling alright. They were screaming for bread, things started to shake. But Marie Antoinette said,
Well, let 'em eat cake.
now the rapper wouldn't have it, they was angry and mean. They built a big old race, a called the guillotine. Then the people up shouted, well, have our day. Down with dirty water, give us Perrier. I said, don't worry, you roll, things might get screwy, but they never lay a finger on good King Louis. Just keep your cool, don't fret, don't freak. I say, hey,
Say what?
say magnifique.
Oh yes, it's good to be the king. Ooh la la, gee, but it's good to be the king.
Your fantasy is my reality.
You can be sure about one thing. Ooh la la, man, it's good to be the king.
It's good to be the king. Night and day, kung fu lady. Well, they broke down the gates in one massive assault, and the party came to a grinding halt. They took the midgets and the funkies with the girls in tow, and a voice said, Louis, it's time to go. They put my neck on the block, they took off my wig, and it occurred to me this was the end of the gig. They asked me, did I have any last words to say? Well, I raised my head and I hollered, hey!
Oh yes, it's good to be the king. Ooh la la, gee, but it's good to be the king.
Well, c'est la vie, make that l'amour.
You can be sure about one thing. Ooh la la, man, it's good to be the king.
It's good to be the king.
Mon Dieu, it's good to be the king. Ooh la la, ooh yes, it's good to be the king.
Well, it was good while it lasted.
We can be sure about one thing.
Thank you for listening to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight. For our other episodes, links to Daniel, Paul, and Lee's other stuff, and links to some great podcasts of similar interest, visit us at tmbdos.podbean.com. There you can leave us comments on the site or directly email us. We listen and respond to everything. Thank you. Drive through.